Welcome to the Mount Pleasant podcast, featuring discussions and interviews about the people, places, and events that make Mount Pleasant such a special place. This is a special episode of Mount Pleasant Podcast, where we interview people who've helped make Mount Pleasant a community residents love to call home.
I am so excited, y'all, because we have Tommy Hartnett here. And Tommy, I'm so excited to see you and talk to you about living on the Isle of Palms and your life in general. But we're going to focus on the Isle of Palms today because that's what this is, the Isle of Palms podcast. Is that okay with you, sir?
You know, Bill, the Isle of Palms is a very special place, and not only just to me, but to the world. I mean, look at the people that flock there. Look at the mansions that have been built there. I mean, we really are South Carolina's Cape Cod, I guess, or Cape, whatever the rich Yankees do up in Massachusetts, we do down here at the Isle of Palms.
I agree with you, Tommy. That's why I wanted to start and publish the Island Vibes, because I think if you live on the island, you forget how much the island touches everybody because you're there every day. But people, like you said, from around the world, right? They come there to vacation, enjoy their life, do they not?
It's incredible the number of people. If you staying over there, you can see the license plates. I've always said nobody lives in Ohio. They just go up to Ohio and get their license plates and come back to South Carolina, because you can look at the license plates from the whole season, from Memorial Day to Labor Day. At least half of the license plates you see are out of state. Let's
talk about you and Isle of Palms and why it's so interwoven with your life. Okay, so. Let's start with the first. Like, these are articles that have run already in Island Vibes, and I'm so excited to let people know more about your life on the Isle of Palms. But my understanding is you got your first job on the Isle of Palms, and one of the reasons you got that is because J.C. Long, your mom was a first cousin of J.C. Long. Is that the case?
That's correct. My dad was first cousin.
And then what was your job and what did you do for J.C. Long?
Bill, that you opened me up for a long answer. I worked it down on the machine part with a fellow by the name of Wilson. He kept all the equipment, the trucks and the tractors and the front end loaders and all running. And I kind of worked down there as his assistant. But really I was more of an errand boy. I was only 16 or 17 years old at the time. But he had another fellow that worked there, and I think his name was Willie. And Willie was an African-American gentleman, probably, I guess at that time he was in his 40s, maybe in his 50s. And Willie he was, I don't know how you'd say, he had some problems in talking, and he was always happy. I wouldn't say he was autistic, but if so, he was on a borderline of being autistic. But Willie would laugh all the time. Let me finish this now. And so Willie was going to take me gigging, flounder gigging in the creek behind the island, which now is nothing but houses and docks. So we showed up, and Willie had a old gasoline lantern, Coleman lanterns, and a gig in a little flat bottom boat. And I was doing the poling in the back, and Willie was standing up front. Well, he changed places and put me up front, and I was looking down in the water for the fish, and I'd hear the splash. And I looked back, and he speared a flounder. I said, well, how did I miss that, Willie? He said, Mr. Tommy, you ain't know how to look for him. You got to know how to look for him. I can see him when you can't see him. So he was one of the most colorful characters I've ever known. And he worked hard, and everybody loved him. And he and I became good friends during that summer. Bill, I don't know whatever became of Willie, but he was a grand old man.
Tommy, it's kind of cool that JC was embraced somebody working there like Willie. I know he was happy and delightful and everything, but you said he had some challenges. So it's cool. Not only was he a minority, but he worked on the island and he had some challenges. So the fact that JC allowed that or permitted that's kind of cool.
Well, he had a heart as big as his body, Bill. And people that didn't know JC criticized him a lot. He was one of the finest people I've ever known. And I think he took Willie on, and everybody at the company loved him. The women who were secretaries in the office, everybody loved Willie. But he did all kind of odd jobs. But he did have some impairments, which didn't slow him down at all.
When you started working there, if you can remember your first week, what year was that? I want
to say it was 1957 or 1958.
Okay, so in 1958, tell the viewers in the audience and what were the roads like?
There weren't any, Bill. At that time, everything pretty much stopped at 21st Avenue, and then it moved on to 41st Avenue. But where the Methodist Church is at 21st Avenue, the property on the right, which is all developed now, was a public picnic ground. And they had picnic tables out there that anybody could use. And of course, the only access was across the Ben Sawyer Bridge and the Inlet Bridge to Isle of Palms. So you had I would say that less than 20% of the roads were in place when I was working over there. They were, cutting roads and paving them, but there were very few roads. Palm Boulevard ran to 21st, and then after that, it went all the way down to 41st, but it stopped dead at 41st Avenue.
It took many years for it to go to 45th Avenue or 41st Avenue. I mean,
yes, it did.
So what year was that? 1957, 55, whatever?
7 or 58. I think more like 58. But at that time, there was only one house between 21st Avenue and 41st Avenue on the front beach. And it was owned by a gentleman, I think, from Columbia. And he had an airplane. And he landed his airplane on the island, and he kept it in the sand dunes. And he used the beach as his runway. I mean, but we'd all want to ride down just to see this big house with this airplane. But there was only one house on the front beach.
That was your first job, and you worked for J.C. Long. But there's other firsts on the island for you. And so what was, to explain what I'm leading up to here? Who did you met somebody on the island?
I did. My wife Bonnie and I, we had our first date on the island. And it was a barbecue at 41st Avenue where you could actually have an open pit on the island, and you could drive onto the beach. And Bonnie and I had our first date there. And one of our chaperones was future Mayor John Tecklenburg's mother and father. Of course, John was not even born then at that time. But he and I'm trying to think what many other couples. Oh, the police chief on the island, Mr. Storen, is one of the police officers on the Isle of Palms. His grandfather was also one of our chaperones on our first date.
Tommy, what year was your first date with Bonnie?
1961.
I like that it's an honest, fair assessment of what's going on the Isle of Palms. Island Vibes.
Great newspaper by a great friend, and so glad he's published this because we really need it. It's impartial, and it's just a great paper.
Island Vibes. It's honest, sincere, and factual.
Island Vibes is a deal.
You're watching the Isle of Palms podcast.
Between the 57 to 1961, you had been working on that island all that time?
No, I only worked there for 2 years. I worked until 1960 when I graduated from high school. So I only worked on there 2 years.
So you had your first job there. You had your first date there. And didn't you buy your first house there?
We did. Bonnie and I bought a house together, although we were not married and we didn't cohabitate at the time. People just didn't do that. We looked forward to living on the Isle of Palms, and JC was building a series of 3-bedroom houses, brick houses built right on the ground. And we bought one with the anticipation. I think it was probably in October when we bought it. We were going to get married in December.
What year?
That would have been 1965.
Okay.
Because we got married in December of 65.
Okay.
But Bonnie was teaching school in North Charleston. We only had the one old Grace Bridge across the Cooper River, and that would have been too long of a drive for her to drive from the Isle of Palms across the. We didn't have I-26, so she would have taken secondary roads all the way to North Charleston. So we sold the house, Bill. Never moved into it. We did take title to it, but never moved into it. And we went ahead after that and moved into a house that I had built west of the Ashley.
Y'all decided because she was a teacher that was
right. So we also realized the fact that it would have been a long travel for her. And I had this house that I had built west of the Ashley that had not sold. So rather than keep trying to sell it and leave it vacant, we moved into that house until we did sell it. Then we moved to downtown Charleston. But Bill, the Isle of Palms, you and I have talked about this before. I was over there when Fort Moultrie was still an active military facility. And we would see the soldiers, they call it bivouacking, I guess, marching up and down the island, the amphibious vehicles driving up and down the island on the beach. So we saw a lot of that kind of activity, where they were drilling, I guess is what you would call it. And we only had that one bridge, Breach Inlet Bridge, to Sullivan's Island. And that was another gathering point for my family. My father's sisters and brother-in-law, we would always go crabbing at Breach Inlet and bring a big tent. And at that time, these people were elderly to me because I was just a child. But I remember catching crabs on the crab line, and plentiful. They were plentiful. Boats, there couldn't have been 4 or 5 boats in that area at that time. Nobody had a boat back then. You couldn't afford a car, much less a boat. But just being there, every time I cross that Breach Inlet Bridge from Sullivan's Island to the Isle of Palms, I think about the fun that we had on that beach right there. On the island. And the place that is now an office building was owned by the former mayor's family. I can't remember who. She was a mayor during Hurricane Hugo. And Bunch. And they had a big restaurant right there, right where that office building is now. That Tom, what's his name? The former mayor owned. Yeah. And they had soul seafood. Across on Sullivan's Island, there was a little bait shop. I mean, Bill, it was just so pristine and so, I don't know, almost out of a book. It was almost like somebody wrote this story about this paradise of an island in South Carolina.
Hearing you talk about it, Tommy, because anybody that's listening to this or watching us, it's got to take them back to days begone that will never come back. When did you move to the Wild Dunes?
1978. I bought one of the cottages when they were building it in 1978. I'd always wanted to have a house on the island because all my rich friends, I lived downtown as a child, all my rich friends' families had houses on the islands, and they'd move away in the summer and leave me with nobody to play baseball with and nobody to play Cowboys and Indians with. So I always said, if I could ever make enough money to have a house on the island and a house in town, I would have arrived. But we did. We were able to purchase our first house on the Isle of Palms in 1978.
You raised your family in downtown, though.
Every summer we spent there, from Memorial Day till after Labor Day. I've got pictures of the children. Well, you have got pictures of my children playing in the sand, and they grew up there. And we sold that house last December. And we got a beautiful handwritten note from the woman and her husband who bought it, saying how much they appreciated us letting them buy our house. And we had left a book of memories for them there. And they said that they just hoped that they could raise their family there and have the memories that we have and had of the Isle of Palms. So at least it went into good hands, and somebody else is going to love that island now.
I don't know anybody except people that have been raised there and born there. There are people on the island, obviously. But you have such deep roots on that island, way before anybody else. I mean, working J.C. Long and his group. One of the things in talking to you and publishing that article was that I always thought that Hartnett Avenue was named after you. But in fact, you told me of a Hartnett that worked for J.C. Long. What did he do, and what was his?
John B. Hartnett. He was my dad's first cousin. And he was the operator of Construction Service Company, which was Uncle JC's construction company. And so Johnny was a cousin of my dad's, and of course he was an uncle. I called him uncle. So he had 2 daughters, much older than I was. But he was a wonderful man, and I would have to say that the island, that Hartnett Boulevard, is named after our family, not just me, but after our family. So in fact, it was named before I got active in politics and in public service.
He was working for JC. Your uncle was working for JC Was that your uncle? Last name?
My dad's first cousin, but we called him Uncle because we were that close with him. Wonderful man.
And did you actually, when you were working for JC those 2 summers, did you work for him directly too one time?
I did. Mr. Hartnett, Uncle Johnny was the president of Construction Service Company, but the foreman that I worked for was a man named Wilson. I worked in the shop area with Wilson and with Willie, so that was what I mostly did.
So your Uncle Hartnett, how many years did he work on the island with JC?
He lived permanently on the island, lived and died on the island. I'd have to say 40 years or more. You know, he was very instrumental in all that developing of the island. But I'm probably one of the few people alive who've personally known every single mayor of the Isle of Palms. I mean, we're starting with Mr. Satilli, because that was a kind of distant family too. The Satillis were. So I remembered every mayor all the way to our present mayor, who is a good friend of mine. Philip Pound is a good friend. And of course, Dick Cronin was a good friend. And I knew all of them. So I did a commercial for Dick Cronin when he ran, saying that I had known every mayor of the Isle of Palms personally. So, and that goes back a pretty good ways to the 50s.
Well, when you bought that house on the island in 1965,
right.
What was the population of the Isle of Palms at that time?
I would have to say it's only 4,000 now. So I would have to say at that time it was probably in the high hundreds, maybe 700 or 600. You never saw anybody much at all, back in the long, long ago. But when we bought that house, it was starting to. JC built that island in anticipation of having a place where ordinary, average, middle-class, hard-working people could live on the beach, on the island. So that's how it started. It didn't start with mega mansions, Bill. It started with little 3-bedroom, 1.5 bathroom houses.
Right.
Some of them built right on the ground. But he had in mind, he did that all over Charleston, North Charleston and West Ashley. He built subdivisions like that. But his love, he stayed on the island all summer long himself. The name of his house was the Riptide, and it's still there. And in the basement of his house, he had a bar, he had slot machines, because he entertained a lot, and he loved being there.
Where was the Riptide located?
It was between 5th and 6th Avenue on the Isle of Palms, and it didn't go much. And Johnny Hartnett's house was on the corner of probably 7th Avenue and Palm Boulevard. So they lived very close together.
JC also wanted to provide housing for people from the military when they got out of the military. After World War II, that was a location they were hoping that they would settle, correct?
And I think there's still a few families of those people left on the island. Now, most of them are long gone, but I think there's still some families who were original owners of houses in those first few blocks of the island. The first members of my family to buy a house was my dad's sister. She bought a house on 5th Avenue. Little 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, flat on the ground, but half a block from the beach. And so, some family ties with the Isle of Palms go back a long, long way, Bill.
As you said, you sold your house in Wild Dunes recently, and you're now living in Ion. Okay, what do you miss most about not being on the island? If you had to think about your lifestyle there and what you and Bonnie enjoyed there, what do you miss most?
Well, one of the things I miss most is the beauty of the island, the tranquility of the island on weekends and during the off season. Obviously, during the season, Bill, it's chaos. It really is. It's something needs to be done to help the residents halfway reclaim their island. But Bill, Bonnie and I could sit on our back porch and watch deer feeding. We could watch fox. I never saw any of the coyotes. They said coyotes were there, but we had an abundance of deer. We would see them every day. They would almost walk up to you. They were tame, but the wildlife and
recently, not used to. You still saw them today when you were there, right?
Oh yes, I saw some just last week. They're everywhere. And somebody said now that my wife plays bridge with some ladies from there that they're finding mink on the island. Minks. I didn't know that was anything native to South Carolina was a mink. But apparently somehow they've infiltrated our natural habitat over there, and there are mink running on the island now.
How many years have you and Bonnie been married?
We will be married. Today is Bonnie's birthday, but we will be married 59 years on the 18th of December.
And how many of those years have you lived on the island?
Since 1978, so that was 48 years, 48 years.
Getting back to the vacationers, I got to tell you, we have a section in the magazine, Tommy, in Island Vibes. We interview people that have vacationed on the island. And one of the couple, they're from Spartanburg, and I asked her, listen to this, Tommy, what do you like most about the Isle of Palms? She didn't talk about the beaches. She didn't talk about the quaint, tranquil setting. She said the residents are so friendly. Is that
but that's just the way we are, Bill. You one of the guys with the most friendly personality I know. You've never met a stranger. You never have. You remember everybody's names. But I have to agree with that. I mean, at that little grocery store, the Harris Teeter that's there now, you can see people from everywhere, and they're sort of amazed when I'll say, "Oh, excuse me," if I'm pushing the grocery cart by them, look at me like, "Excuse me," they're from area where they don't have the same hospitality, the same congeniality, I guess, that we have here. And you have to love it. I mean, that's what this whole area, that's why I hate to see the overdevelopment of so many places.
Tommy, I want to close with that visitor said, and I'd also like to invite you. I've had a lot of fun doing this. You've had such a robust career. May I invite you back to have another podcast about your career beyond Isle of Palms? Would that be okay?
I would love that. It's a storied career. I first was elected to office when I was 22 years old, Bill, and I served for 22 years consecutively in public office. So as a young person, there's not many people that do that today. And the money that you have to spend to get elected public. My son, as you know, is in the legislature now. The money he had to spend to get elected. But I'm proud of him for doing it. But I would love to talk about it and let you know and your listeners know. And
I want to have the conversations that we've had about your relationship with John Edwards and how he got you involved. And those stories need to be told. And I would consider it a privilege to have another podcast with you about that. But I've certainly enjoyed this one.
I always enjoy talking to you. But that next visit, we could really have some fun talking about some things about South Carolina politics that very few people know. That would be a really fun one, Bill. It really would. We might have to use some alias names.
Some of the times I've told people, I've repeated some of the stuff you and I've talked about. It's just history. Nothing bad. It's just history, Right. But they find it very interesting. But Tommy, thanks for being here on the Isle of Palms podcast, and thanks for being a dear friend. And I remember that when you got the first copy of Island Vibes, which has been over a year now, in the mail. Do you remember the email you sent me?
Oh, sure I do. Do you have it there with you now?
I mentioned it, so I need to find it, but I don't have it in front of me. But your words meant a lot to me, Tommy, when you said that I kept going and I'm always there making it happen. And that seriously, sir, that meant a lot to me.
You're a valuable asset to this community, Bill. You know that. I mean, you fill a spot that nobody else could fill with your talent and enthusiasm. So you're a real asset to this community.
Thank you, Tommy. I just love what I do, man. I just love it.
It shows. It shows that you love what you do.
I love telling the story of the Isle of Palms, and of course with my Pleasant magazine, Mount Pleasant. But anyway, thanks for joining us, Tommy, and I'll talk to you again.
Thank you, Bill. You take care. And thank Roger for me, too, okay?
Thanks for listening or watching this special episode of the Mount Pleasant Podcast. Your community, your podcast. Listen or watch past or future episodes at mountpleasantpodcast.com.